guys.
How are you?
I'm so good at, I haven't done a podcast in so long. So I'm so, I mean,
That's because you're like a big Emmy winner now. You're like a big deal.
No. But when you asked me, I mean, we were talking about promoting Podathon, which is such a good cause. So I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Well, so good to see you. So good. I mean, it's you're probably going to be on stage somewhere soon doing another like San Diego con. I don't know, what's the next con you're going to be doing? Do you know that?
I've been up to some stuff
All
behind
right.
the scenes.
See, that's the hard part about talking to you now. Is you're like, hey, get some things.
When I did Hall H Marvel, I couldn't tell anyone until I was physically on the stage. So
wow.
A lot of my friends were like, "Oh," and I was
where
like,
are you going, Ash?
Yeah. I'm just going to be gone for a minute. That's all. Well, we are thrilled to see you. I was thinking about this earlier this week, getting ready for the show. And I don't even know if you can brag this or not, Pete, but I am able to brag that I have had an Emmy winner buy me a shot at a bar at Star Wars Celebration. And that young lady is on the screen with us tonight. We were at Celebration in Anaheim hanging out. Ash came in. Great, so kind to stop because everybody wants to talk to you because you had already done the panel.
Oh, that was right after I hosted.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was right after the panel for it was a Mando panel, wasn't it? No, because Chopper was on stage. It was
it was Ahsoka.
Yeah, it was the Ahsoka the panel that you hosted. So everybody's at the bar at the hotel that night. Everybody's hanging out, lots of Star Wars fun. But you were so kind to stop. And literally, I was like, "Hey, what's up?" And you're like, "Hey, you want a shot?" And I was like, "Of course I do." And you went and bought everybody around a shot. So
I couldn't celebrate all weekend because I was like doing stuff on camera the next day. So I was finally done in that moment, and I was like, "We're all drinking."
Yep. Came on. Let's go. So it was a great moment, and I can officially say I've had a shot bought for me by an Emmy winner. So that's a big deal. But we're glad you're here tonight. And in the off chance, and I can't imagine how this is possible, but in the off chance somebody doesn't know Ash Crossan, doesn't know who you are, give us just a quick background on who Ash is.
Sure. Okay. I'm really bad at bragging, but I will try. Okay. Hi, my name is Ash Crossan. So I'm a producer and digital correspondent at Entertainment Tonight, which I've worked there since 2012. Sans 1 year I left and worked at Screen Rant. So you might have seen my stuff there. I do a ton of things behind the scenes, but front facing, I do a lot of various carpets, junkets, moderating panels. You'll see me doing like sit down interviews, typically with like genre talent or fandom talent. So Star Wars, Marvel, DC on the show side lately, The Last of Us, Fallout, typically just fandom driven stuff. And then, as mentioned, I moderated Marvel Studios Hall H, Star Wars Celebration panels, Paley Fest with Mandalorian, lots of stuff with John and Dave. The only dream interview I really have left is Eminem. Not sure that will ever happen, but I've been very, very blessed. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears, but very blessed.
Well, and I think you're going to have to, at some point, probably call Pedro and find out how he feels about the fact that Kyle MacLachlan is now trying to horn in on being your new best friend.
I know. Well, Kyle MacLachlan's social media is so good.
Yeah, they're on top of it for sure. So seeing that from the Fallout, premiere here just recently, that's been a lot of fun. Seeing you get to have those interactions. But I have said this, I think we've said this before, even when you've been on with us, but we have several friends that like you, Christina Ariel, like you're one of us, but you're also getting to go let your job be a part of like doing all those other things that we're all so excited about. So having that person that's, you're out there representing all of us as a fan and a reporter and a correspondent. And so we always are excited every time you pop up on a panel, an interview, whatever it is. It's so great.
No, it means a lot. I mean, that's what I love about it so much is whenever I do those things, there is a lot of support in the room and that makes me love it. So, yeah.
We've had a question I've asked a couple people lately who are in a role where they get to speak to the actors and the creators of the stuff that we love. How do you, and I'm going to ask this having watched you almost every interview, it must be hard to separate the fan from the journalist. And so do you do that? How do you manage that so that you got to be you, right? I mean, you're always Ash, but
yeah.
How do you manage that so you're not totally fangirling out and getting your work done?
I think the one thing that I've struggled with, and not so much with Star Wars, but it's been with other things that I've been like passionate about over the years, is there's a point where you start watching stuff, like I start watching TV or movies and stuff, and I'm like, I can't calm down and watch this because I feel like I'm working. I have to constantly be like, dissecting it. I mean, I'm sure you guys get this with the podcast sometimes when you're watching Star Wars stuff. You're like, oh, what can we talk about? What are our news angles? What are we gonna like dissect?
Right.
So it is kind of hard to like not make it feel like work. But at the same time, there's so much passion behind it. Like we can talk. I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but like John and Dave, for example, when it comes to the Mandalorian stuff, they make you so involved so early on that you just feel. They make you feel a part of the team to the point where you are so passionate and happy to be a part of it. And so when I get to that point, I'm just like, I just want to ask what I want to know as a fan. If I try to like sit there and be like, what does everybody want me to ask? I'm going to get way too in my head. I'm going to ask kind of silly stuff or stuff that's not going to work for me. I just say what I really want to know. And a lot of times to my, it's a blessing and a curse. A lot of times things just come out of my mouth and I'm like, why did I say that? And then it goes viral.
It comes with the territory. That's okay. Well, and we want to talk about it. Like you said, we're going to get a little bit more into your career and some of the ways that has, been affected by your fandom. Like Pete said, let's talk Star Wars for a minute. Let's dial it back to the beginning again. If somebody hasn't heard this story, I know Pete and I have heard it, but what are your earliest Star Wars memories? When did you first see it? How did it connect with you?
Yeah, so I've definitely told you guys this story before, but I saw it. So they re-released it in 1997. So I was, I think, 8 at the time. And my dad was like, I'm going to take you to see this movie. And I was like, no, I don't want to hang out with my dad, like that age or whatever. So my dad takes me to the Movies 10 in Wilmington, Delaware. It was one of those movie theaters where your like feet stick to the floor and it was like, no stadium seating. So it's all flat. I remember we sat in the front row, and even back then, like the front row seats were so much closer than they are now. So you're really like this. Right. And I remember just like watching Princess Leia and being like, who is this princess? Literally. And I was her for Halloween that year. I would say the rest is history, but it was kind of like me and my dad's thing when I was younger. And, a few of my friends were really into Star Wars, but it wasn't really until I started my career that I was able to really like find the community in Star Wars. I remember going to my first celebration was Anaheim. I want to say it was 2016, 2015. Does that sound right? And that's where I met Anthony Brasnikin, Jermaine Lucier. Like those people are still my best friends to this day. And some of my best lasting relationships have been because of Star Wars. And then the third part of that is I've been able to foster like a career out of it in a way. Right. So then that, like, it's kind of 3 parts of Star Wars that mean so much to me for different reasons.
So how did you kind of fall into the entertainment side of it? And did your love of Star Wars and other genre kind of things? Because obviously, I mean, anybody who follows you knows it's not just, Star Wars is really important to you, but all the stuff that all of us nerd out about. But how did you go into the journalism side of it and entertainment journalism specifically?
Yeah. So I went to school for broadcast journalism. I went to East Carolina, go Pirates. And I moved out here right after college to be in the entertainment industry. I thought I was going to be a producer, which I am, but like a producer, I never really thought I was going to be like an on-camera front-facing type of person. I didn't really think that was in the cards for me. And what ended up happening is I was a PA, and then I was an assistant, and then I was like an associate producer at the time. And something big had happened at work that day. I think there was like a big celebrity death or something like that. And it was the same day as the Ant-Man junket for Marvel. And we had to send all of our hosts and all of our talent to like a hospital and to all these various different news scenes and things like that. They were like, who's going to do the Ant-Man junket? And I remember being in this room and it was crowded, and I've never really like advocated for myself like that, which you have to do. And I remember just being like, I can do it. I can do it. I know a lot about Marvel. I can go do this interview. And I remember 2 producers looking at each other and they're like, should we? And they're like, we don't really have a choice. I'm like, okay, go for it. And I remember doing that interview and feeling like really nervous. You really never know how those things go when you're doing them until you watch the footage back, and then you're like, oh, that went a lot better than I thought, or a lot worse than I thought. And I remember a director coming up to me named Tom Weitzel, and he was like, hey, you did that Ant-Man junket? And I was preparing for like, oh no, what can I do?
Maybe.
He was like, you should keep doing interviews. And I was like, oh. And I remember that was a moment that kind of flipped the switch for me and kind of sparked that interest. But I also think passion is key. I work at Entertainment Tonight. We cover an array of things. We cover, every pocket of entertainment you can think of. But what works for me and why it's successful is that I'm passionate about the things that I talk about, and I can dig into it from a fandom perspective instead of asking, if you sent me on I don't know, I can't think of an example, a shoot that I don't know anything about, I would probably ask surface level questions, and it would be a decent interview, but it wouldn't really be a fandom driven interview. So I think the fact that I'm able to do that is why I've kind of continued on that track.
Well, and it almost seems like, and this is going to be very generalized and kind of to come to your point you were just making, but like you're at work and it's Tuesday and there's a story about, The Young and the Restless, or a, soap opera thing happens. There may not be somebody that runs in the room and goes, hey, it's a soap opera thing, give it to Ash. It may be, hey, there's Marvel news. Does it kind of work that way? Do people have lanes and like it feeds?
Yeah, I think, we have like an array of talent and people kind of have their pockets of like, oh, they already have a relationship with this person, or oh, they're really passionate about this thing. We should definitely consider them for those things. Like, I'll give you an example. I did a set visit with JoJo Siwa for that Carmel video that's viral. And I remember being on that set being like, what? I'm here. But it ended up being fun for that reason, because I was like kind of a fish out of water, and that happens sometimes. And, when I do get assigned stuff I don't really know, I'm like, hey, I'm not an expert yet. I'm going to become one overnight. I'm going to stay up all night binging this show. But typically they try to
feed it in the right direction. Yeah, sure. Well, and I want to talk about and dig into this because this process fascinates me, certainly as a fan of, so many different things. But not only do you have your reporting, you have your Entertainment Tonight, that kind of stuff, but the panel hosting, like this has become something else that you have been known for. And you've done Celebration, like you said, you've done Hall H at Comic-Con, which is kind of like the top tier of, panel hosting. Talk to us a little bit, not only about getting into it, but like the process for that. Because of course there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, the preparation. Kind of walk us through what that kind of thing is like and how you got into doing that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first one I ever did was the press conference for Mandalorian season 1. And I remember John kind of coming up to me after and hugging me and being like, oh my gosh, that was so good. We want to use you all the time. So that's kind of how that track with them started. And they like to repeatedly work with the same people. So I've been really honored in that regard. But it's kind of different for every panel that you do. Like Star Wars Celebration is very different from Marvel Hall H, is very different from a fan event, is very different from like a FYC event, which is like a, for people who don't know, it's a 4-year consideration, like Emmy type event or Oscars or whatever. So Star Wars Celebration, like for example, is a conversation, whereas Marvel Hall H, I would more say was like a showcase where you're kind of just like moving it along. And yeah, they're all kind of different. So I approach them differently every time, but they are way more collaborative than you would think, specifically with those panels that I'm talking about. Because I've done panels in the past or moderated things where they're like, here is your cards and your exact phrasing, and here's your exact questions, and you need to ask in this order. They essentially give you a script to the point where, and I find that very frustrating because it's like, why am I here? You can kind of plug anybody into this. Like it's I don't really like to do things that aren't really in my voice, or I guess. And I used to not push back on that. But now I do. Now I'm very defiant. So really, but it like, for example, when I'm like Marvel Hall H, like Kevin Feige was really collaborative, and you don't always have time to meet up, like talk to these people beforehand or anything like that. But with Kevin, we did like a rehearsal, and we got to kind of work out all the kinks together, which was really interesting to me. So we would like kind of go through all the questions that I had, and he would kind of give me feedback and be like, hey, I think we're saying like, because when you do a panel like that and you're like, did you bring anything to show us? He was like, I remember him being like, that's like kind of a cliche. Like, let's find another phrasing for it. I'm like, no, fair. And then, on the other side of it, it was really early on. I introduce him, and he comes out and does this. And then we're in the rehearsal, and he's like 15 minutes in. He's like, you haven't really talked though. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, all right, we're going to give you some more stuff to fill in here. And just like, he really made it like a really collaborative thing. And we really talked back and forth. And I felt like, he listened to a lot of suggestions that I had. And, Dave's the same way. John's the same way. Dave tends to go, Ash knows what to ask. And he also, Dave knows what stories he wants to tell. Like anyone that's seen a Dave panel knows he is a storyteller.
That's right.
A talker. You don't really have to steer the ship too much with him. And in fact, you more have to like
you have to pull him back sometimes.
Pull him back in.
Yeah.
But he knows this. I've talked to him about this before. And then John Favreau is a really, really cool collaborator in that, like I mentioned, he brings people in really early. Like a lot of his teams that he works with, like editors, for example, he brings them in like the storyboarding stage, which is not typical of a project. So I'll give an example. We did a panel one time that was they wanted me to ask like a lot of like technical questions about The Mandalorian. And it was actually a fan event. And so beforehand, I think I had like 10 minutes backstage with John. I pulled him aside and I was like, John, like, you know, I think the fans will appreciate if we lean a little more into like this. And I remember him going like, oh, I thought this was an FYC event. I'm like, no, it's like a fan event. There's tickets. And he's like, what questions do you want? And I was like, this. He's like, great, go, we're going. And like, so he really trusts me in that regard. I think that was something we had to build towards, obviously, but now that we're there, he genuinely is always just like, whatever you think, whatever you want.
And I think it's such a neat reflection. You've experienced this certainly working with them directly, but one of the most telling things for me was the very first season of, and I forget what it's called now, but the behind the scenes stuff that came out after Mando season 1. The gallery. Yeah. Yep. Like that episode when you've got Dave and John sitting around the table with Bryce Dallas Howard, with all these other directors, like you can see that same dynamic. Like you see John as that engaging personality, and Dave, for everything we love about him, like he's the nerd at the table going, well, here's why we didn't talk about this. And he's going to go on a whole path about the lore and the story and all. And so that combo is so fascinating to me. And surely, you know, getting to see that and work with that directly has been really fun.
Yeah. I mean, they know every single person's name who works with them. Like they do not. And to be honest, you don't get that a lot. So they know, like they're so in it. And I love how they bring people in like that.
It's awesome.
Well, so I'm gonna turn this into some fan question for you, because so taking your fan side and taking your industry side, you know, the last this year is the year of Disney Plus, right? This is obviously, we have 2 live action series. We have the surprise, Tales of the Empire. We probably have Tales of the Jedi 2 coming. We got Bad Batch. 2025 and 6, probably not 25 realistically, but 26, we're going back to the theaters for Star Wars. What's your thoughts on the way stories will be told for Star Wars, the best way? And what do you, as a fan, how do you like to get your Star Wars stories?
You know, well, first of all, I have a rule now with Star Wars. Love you, Star Wars, but unless you're in production, I am not putting stock in it yet. I have out too many times.
It's true. It's true. So those movies, they haven't started yet. So we're
this Taika Waititi movie that I'm never going to get.
Never going to get. I would love it. You know, I know people are really burned out on Taika at the moment. He is still my favorite director. I would love to see his thumbprint in Star Wars.
His vision, would be wild.
Yeah. I love him. But I think they probably learned some lessons overall at Disney Plus from how much Marvel they were doing and how much they were introducing and how it was kind of a lot at once. What did they introduce, like 50 characters in a year in Marvel? Something like that. I'm making that number up completely.
Yeah, but it was huge.
It was something like that, genuinely. So I think them slowing down and pulling back, and which they have with Star Wars, we got a little break and now we're kind of getting in the groove again, is really exciting. Because I think, you know, when you're making a trilogy or you're using the same characters like we've seen, there has to be kind of a cohesiveness to it. And there's not a lot of room for, I think, a super unique thumbprint. So I'm really excited to see the more personal touches and flavor of the creatives, honestly. Like we saw, you know, I love Mandalorian. One of my favorite things. And then you see Andor with Tony Gilroy. And some people, that is their favorite Star Wars because it does have its own kind of identity. So like being able to branch out around different pockets of Star Wars, I think is the more exciting thing for me. Like the Acolyte, of course, being set in the High Republic. Like I always center when people are asking me about timeline stuff and they're like, when does this take place? I'm always like, if you think of how old Luke is, that will help you put it into place in the timeline. Acolyte, he's like -200. That's so exciting. So,
Yes.
but anyway, like, but what's more exciting for me about that is Leslie Headland and like
Yeah.
her whole idea of doing what she call it, Frozen meets Kill Bill. Like that's really intriguing to me. Skeleton Crew being like more of a Goonies, Amblin kids type thing with John Watts, who nailed the Spider-Man trilogy.
Oh man,
Super exciting. Again, people burn out on Taika, but I want to see whatever weird crap he wants to bring into Star Wars. The Glovers potentially doing Lando. Like that excites me to see the freedom that the creators I think are starting to get and whatever thumbprint they're going to leave on it. That's more of the stuff I want to see. We saw that with Marvel, and then I think they maybe overdid it a little bit, but when like James Gunn came in and did this totally new thing in Marvel, I think we're kind of starting to see that chapter.
Yeah. Yeah. And for some reason, and this is where the frustration comes in, is Star Wars, there's a voice of Star Wars. And I always have to remind myself of this. There's a piece of the Star Wars fandom that's like, it's new. I don't like it. I don't want to know anything about it. But it's really a small piece. I think that's the thing. I mean, you see it more than anybody else because Entertainment Tonight is for the masses, right?
Yeah.
And we get into the social media stuff. We get into the show. We even see sometimes in comments, we're like, yeah, but no, it needs that. And Leslie is going to bring, I mean, gosh, look at Russian Doll, to just bring that kind of mindset to a Star Wars set in a time where all these characters could die in the first episode because we don't know their futures, right? So anything can happen. And I think I'm with you on that. I'm super excited to see.
It should be more, it should be exciting that not every piece of Star Wars is going to be for you. Like
Correct.
that should be an exciting thing.
Yep.
That's what I love about art. Like, you know, I remember walking out of like, for example, I remember I walked out of Barbie with a friend of mine and he was like, who was that for? And I was like, that was for me. That movie rocked. But like, it's okay. It's okay. There's going to be stuff that comes out. I mean, not every piece of Star Wars has been like my favorite thing on the planet, but I love Star Wars. So it's fine. That's exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when I interviewed you the first time, the way you put it was Star Wars is like your younger brother. You love him, but you don't mind making fun of him and telling him when he does something wrong. Right.
That's
so
it. No, it is like that. Cause it's like, there's certain people that like, you know, when they're saying stuff about Star Wars, you're like, okay, I know why we're all making fun of this, but you're genuinely punching down.
Right. Exactly. Well, Ash, we could keep you on for hours and hours, but
I got to go to the Jimmy Buffett tribute concert.
Is that where you're headed?
Outstanding.
Oh man. See,
Son of a Sailor. It's my favorite Jimmy Buffett song.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm like so excited. It's like, what is Pitbull going to sing? Like Paul McCartney. What is this going to be? I don't know, but I will post videos.
We'll look forward to following it on social media while you're there.
Well, Ash, where can people follow you on social media so they can catch this and all the other cool stuff you do?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter constantly, as you guys all know. That's at Ash Crossan. And then someone took that handle for Instagram. So I'm at Ash_Crossan for Instagram. And that's really where I post all my stuff. But etonline.com. I'll plug my job.
There you go. Well, excellent. Well, Ash, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch up with you on Podathon a little bit afterwards. Enjoy the show. Thank you so much for hanging. See ya.
See ya.
Bye.